A werewolf shifter romance written by Catherine Stewart. Prologue. You'd think breathing would be easy, wouldn't you? Just in, then out. Everyone does it. Simple. At least, I used to think so, a lifetime ago, before this silver fire decided I was its to burn. Back then, I was just a girl. Mostly scabby knees and a tangled mess of hair, my laugh probably chasing butterflies through our pack's deep woods. And I remember that one afternoon, so clearly. The air tasting like the first bite of a crisp apple, all damp earth and falling leaves under my boots. It was just an ordinary day, you know? The scent of pine was so sharp, so clean in my nose. My friends, their voices were like little bells just ahead, daring each other, something about the oldest, gnarliest oak at the edge of the clearing. Maybe it was the thrill of it all, that feeling when you're a kid and everything is pure, bright joy, because I remember running, trying to catch up. Then, without any warning, my whole world just shattered. It wasn't a sound, not really, not at first. It was this light. An impossible, searing silver light that just clawed its way out of me, right out from inside my own skin, tearing through the air around me. My own hands. I remember looking at them, and they were lit up like two fallen stars. So hot. So suddenly, not mine anymore. And then the screaming started, theirs. Then mine, as that silver fire, so beautiful, so utterly terrifying, just lashed out. This wild, untamed thing I couldn't stop. Looking back now. I should have known, shouldn't I? That some things, once they break, they don't ever really go back together right. And that the brightest lights, well, they always seem to cast the deepest, most lonesome shadows. How could a touch, just a feeling meant for play, turn into something that scattered everything to the wind? Leaving only that awful quiet and the sharp smell of a storm in its wake? That was the day the whispering started, you see, the day even the forest seemed to hold its breath when I walked by. Right. She was going to die out here, wasn't she? The thought wasn't new, not really. Felt more like an old, unwelcome coat she couldn't quite shed, heavy on her shoulders, its collar rank with the smell of fear and damp earth. But then, this time, it felt different. Sharper. Closer. Because the hunger, oh, the hunger, was a living thing inside her now, coiling and uncoiling in the pit of her stomach like a starving wolf itself, its teeth scraping against her ribs. Emma pressed herself deeper into the inadequate shadow of a skeletal hawthorn, the thorny branches snagging her already tattered tunic, a cruel mirror to the barbs of pain in her belly. Her breath came in shallow, misting puffs in the chill morning air, each one a tiny betrayal, announcing her presence to anything that might be listening. And something was always listening in these blighted woods, these forgotten fringes of a kingdom she only knew from the bitter whispers of other outcasts, a kingdom ruled by a cursed king, they said, his lands as sick as his bloodline. Not that it mattered much to her, did it? One patch of hostile woods was much like another when you were nothing. A ghost, with a dangerous secret. Truth be told, she'd almost forgotten what a full belly felt like, or the simple comfort of an unthreatened breath. Her life was a tapestry woven from near misses and gnawing emptiness, each dawn a fresh gamble against starvation, or discovery. It had been 3 days since her last decent meal, a half-rotted apple found clinging stubbornly to a branch, its flesh mealy but, oh, so sweet on her tongue. Before that? A handful of bitter roots that had left her stomach cramping for hours. It wasn't a life. It was an existence. Pared down to the bone. Each sunrise, a dare. She swallowed. The motion dry, and painful, in her throat. And then, her gaze, perpetually scanning, snagged on a flicker of movement near the frost-kissed edge of a streamlet. A rabbit! Small, probably stringy, but it was meat. Her heart gave a painful thud. Hope, that treacherous little flicker, dared to ignite. Without thinking, almost as if pulled by an invisible string, her body moved, a predator's grace belying the weakness that gnawed at her. She was downwind. The breeze, sharp with the scent of pine and imminent snow, carried her scent away from her potential meal. Each step was a careful calculation, a silent conversation with the forest floor. Twigs were avoided. Dry leaves sidestepped. Because a single snap, a rustle too loud, and it would be over. Her world had narrowed to this one point, this single focus, the rabbit, its nose twitching, blissfully unaware. Deep down, she knew the truth, this wasn't just about hunger anymore, was it? It was about proving she could still do this, that she wasn't just waiting to fade away. The alternative was a slow, cold surrender. And her spirit, though battered, wasn't quite broken. Not yet. Not yet. Just as she gathered herself to pounce, a different scent, acrid and wrong, pricked her nostrils. A smell like old blood and something else, something metallic and unnatural that made the fine hairs on her arms stand on end. Her head snapped up. The rabbit, startled by her sudden tension, bolted, a brown blur vanishing into the undergrowth. No! Emma's stomach clenched with a fresh wave of despair, quickly overshadowed by a rising tide of alarm. That scent, it was an old memory. One that tasted of terror and burning silver. She didn't know what scared her more, the sudden loss of her meal, or the icy premonition that always accompanied that particular, vile odor. It was the smell of them. The ones who hunted things like her for reasons she couldn't fathom, their cruelty as boundless as the dark magic they served. Before she could move, a guttural snarl ripped through the stillness, closer than she dared imagine. Her blood turned to ice. Not just one. Several. And then, breaking through the brittle ferns, they came, hounds. But no hounds she'd ever seen in the natural world. Their fur was the color of ash and shadow. Their eyes burned with an internal, hellish red. And saliva, thick and black, dripped from jaws that looked capable of snapping bone like dry twigs. These were the fabled Shadow Hounds. Creatures whispered about in terrified tones even by the toughest rogues, the personal hunting beasts of the Shadow Weavers themselves. But why here? Why her? She was a nobody, a starving outcast. What could they possibly want with her? Maybe it was fate. Or maybe just the universe's cruelest joke. Her body moved on instinct, a desperate, scrambling retreat. There was no thought of fighting. Not against these. These were weapons. Living, breathing, slavering weapons. Behind her, the forest erupted in a chorus of their baying, a sound that promised a brutal, agonizing end. Branches tore at her face. Roots threatened to trip her. But she barely registered the pain. Her lungs burned, a raw fire with every ragged gasp of air. She could hear them gaining, their heavy paws thudding on the frozen earth, the air thick with their foul, predatory scent. Every beat of her heart hammered a single word against her ribs, trapped, trapped, trapped. And then, she burst from the dense undergrowth into a place she'd never seen before. A place that felt different. The air here thrummed with a strange, almost visible energy, ancient and potent. Towering, silver-barked trees, their leaves shimmering with an unnatural luminescence even in the dim light, formed a silent, watchful circle around a clearing that felt like the heart of the world. This was the Ashenwood, wasn't it? The one the old tales warned rogues to avoid, a place of potent, unpredictable magic, a place said to be under the direct, possessive gaze of the cursed king himself. She'd stumbled into the lion's den to escape the wolves. What a choice. To herself, breathless, what would you have done, if faced with such a desperate gamble? The hounds, however, showed no such awe. No hesitation. They surged into the clearing, their red eyes fixed on her, slavering jaws agape. Cornered. There was nowhere left to run. A strangled sob, half terror, half despair, tore from her throat. This was it then. This was how her pitiful story ended. It was in that moment, with the shadow of death falling cold upon her, that something inside Emma, something she'd fought to suppress for years, something she feared almost as much as the hounds, finally snapped. It wasn't a decision. It was a detonation. A searing, silver light, impossibly bright, erupted from her. A silent scream of pure, untamed power. It pulsed outwards, a shockwave of raw lunar energy. Hot and wild. Smelling of ozone and starlight. The very air crackled. The ground beneath her feet hummed like a struck gong. The encroaching hounds whined, a sudden note of fear, even confusion, in their predatory chorus as they stumbled back from the unexpected, radiant onslaught. Emma stood at the epicenter of this chaotic, beautiful, terrifying nova. Her small hands glowing like brands. Her eyes wide with a mixture of her own terror and a dawning, horrifying understanding. The fire was loose again. Oh gods, the fire she could never control. It felt like it was tearing her apart from the inside out, a power too vast for her frail human form. No. She whispered, the word lost in the thrumming energy, not again. Please, not again. She squeezed her eyes shut, bracing for the agony, for the destruction she knew always followed when this wild magic broke free. But then, a different sound cut through the chaos. A sound that didn't belong. A roar. Deep and resonant. Filled with an authority that seemed to shake the ancient trees to their roots. A sound that spoke of power even greater than the one currently ripping through her. And with it, a new scent hit the air, overriding the fetid odor of the hounds and the sharp tang of her own magic. It was the scent of pine needles crushed underfoot, of clean earth, of winter storms, and something else, something intensely, intoxicatingly male. Alpha. Before she could even process it, a massive form, a blur of dark fur and primal fury, slammed into the pack of shadow hounds. The clearing exploded into a maelstrom of violence. Snarls. Yelps of pain. The sickening crunch of bone. Emma, her own uncontrolled magic still pulsing erratically around her like a broken shield, could only watch, stunned, as this newcomer, this colossal leakin, black as a moonless night, tore through the shadow hounds with a brutal, terrifying efficiency. He moved like a seasoned warrior. Each strike precise. Each movement a testament to raw, controlled power, so unlike her own chaotic outbursts. He was a whirlwind of claws and teeth. A force of nature unleashed. One by one, the hellish hounds fell, their red eyes dimming, their unnatural forms dissolving into wisps of foul-smelling smoke. In the span of a breath, it was over. The silence that descended was almost as shocking as the preceding violence, broken only by the newcomer's harsh, ragged breathing and the faint, crackling hum of Emma's own fading, volatile energy. Slowly, the giant Leakin turned. Emma's breath hitched. His fur was the deepest black, but his eyes were like molten gold. Intelligent. Piercing. And currently fixed on her with an intensity that made her skin prickle. He was huge, easily the largest wolf she had ever seen, radiating an aura of command that was almost a physical force. She had never been this close to a true alpha, let alone one of this magnitude. And he was looking at her not as a savior, but as if she were something strange and dangerous he'd found tangled in his snare. Which, she supposed, wasn't far from the truth. Then, between one breath and the next, the air around him shimmered. His form blurring. Bones shifting with audible cracks and reshapes that should have been horrifying but were, in some strange way, utterly mesmerizing. He grew taller, broader, the fur receding, the snout shortening. And where the massive wolf had stood, now stood a man. Tall, so incredibly tall, with shoulders broad enough to carry the weight of the world, and a face that was all harsh plains and savage beauty. His hair was as black as his wolf's pelt, falling across a high forehead. And his eyes, those same molten gold eyes, now held an undeniable, sharp intelligence and a weariness that spoke of old burdens. He wore simple, dark leathers, but they did nothing to hide the sheer power in his build. He was magnificent. And terrifying. He took a step towards her. Emma flinched, her own magic sputtering nervously. "Who are you?" His voice, when it came, was a low rumble, like distant thunder, deep and resonant, carrying the same intrinsic authority his wolf form had possessed. It wasn't a question so much as a demand, a command for answers she didn't have. His gaze swept over her, taking in her tattered clothes, her wild eyes, the faint silver aura still clinging to her skin. "And what," he continued, his golden eyes narrowing, "have you brought to my lands?" Emma opened her mouth. No words came out. Her throat was dry, her mind a chaotic whirl. What could she say? That she was a mistake? A rogue who couldn't control the fire inside her? That she'd accidentally stumbled into his sacred wood and drawn monsters to his doorstep? Looking back, she should have probably tried for something, anything. But deep down, she knew the truth, there were no easy answers when you were Emma. Before either could speak further, a subtle shift in the air, a prickling at the back of her neck, heralded a new, more insidious threat. The lingering scent of the shadow weavers, the masters of the hounds, intensified. From the deeper shadows at the edge of the Ashenwood, where the ancient trees grew thickest and the light dared not penetrate, new figures began to emerge. Not hounds this time. These were humanoid, cloaked and cowled, their forms indistinct, yet radiating a chilling aura of malice and dark, manipulative power. One of them raised a hand, and a bolt of sickly green energy hissed through the air. Aimed not at Emma, but directly at the imposing Alpha King who had just saved her life.
Green fire. Of all the accursed things this day had thrown at him, rogue magic. Shadow hounds at the heart of his ancestral woods. A strange, incandescent girl who smelled of moonlight and trouble. It had to be green fire. Hissing like a viper, aimed directly at his chest. Kaelen didn't think. He moved. His body, honed by centuries of battle and the bitter sting of his lineage's curse, reacted with a speed that belied the weariness settling deep in his bones. He shoved the silver-haired girl. Emma, was it? Had he even caught her name amidst the chaos, roughly behind him? A purely instinctual act, one his mind hadn't even caught up to yet. The bolt of corrupt energy, reeking of the Shadow Weaver's particular brand of filth, slammed into the space where he'd stood a heartbeat before, impacting an ancient silverwood with a sickening sizzle, leaving a blackened, smoking scar on its sacred bark. Fury, cold and sharp, lanced through him. They dared attack him here, in the Ashenwood, the very heart of his power. And in front of this enigma of a girl, more figures, cloaked and exuding that same chilling malice as their hounds, were now fully visible, their intent horribly clear. They weren't just after the girl, they were challenging him. "You overstep, Weaver." Kaelen's voice was a low growl, the sound of mountains grinding together, each word resonating with the power of the Alpha King. His golden eyes, narrowed to predatory slits, fixed on the leader, the one who had dared cast the first stone. He could feel the girl trembling behind him, her strange, wild magic still thrumming in the air like an unsheathed blade, a chaotic counterpoint to his own grounded strength. For a fleeting moment, he wondered if she was more liability than anything else. But then, that scent of moonlight, so unique, so compelling, even amidst the reek of dark magic, tugged at something ancient and primal within him. It was a distraction he couldn't afford. Not now. You will not leave my woods alive. And then, with a roar that was more beast than man, Kaelen launched himself forward. The fight was brutal, a desperate dance on consecrated ground. These were not mindless hounds. These were sorcerers, cunning and slippery, their attacks a barrage of dark bolts and shadowy tendrils that sought to trip and bind. He moved through them like a storm, his claws, a gift from his shifting heritage, extending with deadly intent. His fangs bared. He felt a searing pain as a dark whip of energy caught his arm, the magic biting deep. But he ignored it, focusing on protecting his back, where the girl still huddled. Why? Why was he so determined to shield her, this unknown who had brought such chaos? Deep down, a voice he hadn't heard in centuries, a voice that spoke of fate and bonds older than stone, whispered an answer he wasn't ready to acknowledge. Maybe it was the way her silver light had flared, so pure against their darkness. Or perhaps it was simpler, more primal than that. She was in his territory, and she was under his protection, whether she knew it or not. He dispatched one weaver with a savage swipe, then another with a bone-jarring tackle. His wolf pushing for control, an exhilarating, dangerous surge. Yet, even as he fought, a part of his mind was cataloging every flicker of the girl's energy, every terrified gasp. She was a mystery, and Kaelen, despite the curse that had taught him to trust little and expect less, found himself intensely, dangerously curious. As the last shadow weaver fell, gurgling his life away on the forest floor, Kaelen straightened, his breath coming in ragged gusts. The silence of the Ashenwood slowly reasserting itself, thick and watchful. Only then did he turn his full attention back to the trembling girl with eyes like frightened stars and magic like a captive moonbeam. She looked so small, so fragile against the backdrop of the ancient, powerful woods. Yet, he had seen what she could do. He had felt it. What in the blighted lands was she? He took a step towards her. The girl, Emma. He decided her name must be Emma. It felt right somehow. Flinched as if expecting a blow. Her wild, silver-blue eyes, wide and luminous in the dimming light of the clearing, were fixed on him, a maelstrom of fear and defiance swirling within their depths. Her tattered clothes, ripped and dirted from her flight through the undergrowth, did little to conceal the slightness of her frame. Yet there was an undeniable resilience in the set of her jaw, a refusal to completely break that resonated with something deep inside him. He was used to fear, of course. It was the natural response of most to his power, to his kingship, to the very aura of command that clung to him like his own shadow. But hers was different. It wasn't just awe or terror of an alpha. It was the fear of a hunted animal, yes, but also the fear of herself, of the chaotic power that had exploded from her. He could smell it on her, that sharp, metallic tang of uncontrolled magic mixed with the softer, achingly vulnerable scent of pure terror. "The fortress," he said, his voice rougher than he intended, still carrying the lingering rasp of his battle snarls. "You will come with me." It wasn't a request. His mind was already racing, weighing options, assessing threats. She was a rogue, clearly, but no ordinary one. That power, it was like nothing he'd encountered. Raw, untamed, and dangerously potent. Leaving her here, especially after the Shadow Weavers had shown such a keen interest, was unthinkable. She was either a weapon waiting to be claimed, or a catastrophe waiting to happen. And either way, Kaelen needed her where he could watch her. Besides, there was that insistent, damnably distracting pull, that undercurrent in his blood that hummed whenever he was near her, a silent song his soul seemed to recognize even if his mind refused to name it. He saw the immediate refusal leap into her eyes, the way her chin tilted up. Oh, she had spirit, this one did. Interesting. I don't think so, she whispered, her voice surprisingly steady despite the tremor he could see running through her. I don't go with anyone. Kaelen almost smiled. Almost. Instead, he let a fraction of his true power bleed into his aura, the air around them growing heavy, charged, the very trees seeming to lean in. Her breath caught. Her eyes widened further, the defiance faltering just a little. You misunderstand, he stated, his golden gaze unwavering. That was not an invitation. It was a command. He saw the fight in her, the desperate urge to flee. But he also saw the dawning resignation. She was intelligent enough to know she had no real choice. Not here. Not now. What will you do with me? She finally managed, the words barely audible. A fair question, he supposed. He didn't have a full answer yet himself, did he? That, he said, his voice softening just a fraction, a concession he rarely made, remains to be seen. But for now, you are under my protection, and you will be my guest. Guest. The word felt strange on his tongue, applied to this wild, magical creature. He extended a hand, a silent offer of, well, not peace. Not yet, but perhaps a momentary truce. After a long, heart-stopping moment, her small, trembling hand, still faintly aglow with residual silver light, hesitantly reached out and slipped into his. Her skin was cold, but a jolt, like lightning trapped in velvet, shot up his arm at the contact. Gods, what was this girl? The journey to his fortress, Blackwood Keep, was mostly silent, punctuated only by the sounds of the forest and the uneasy rhythm of their footsteps. Kaelen had half expected her to try and bolt, but she walked beside him, or rather slightly behind, as if tethered by an invisible leash, her head bowed, but her senses, he could tell, were on high alert, cataloging every shadow, every rustle of leaves. He kept his pace measured, aware of the exhaustion that radiated from her in waves, though she did her best to hide it. He'd offered to carry her, a suggestion met with a glare so fierce it had almost been amusing. Stubborn. He found he didn't entirely dislike it. As they cleared the shadowed depths of the Ashenwood, the imposing silhouette of Blackwood Keep rose against the bruised twilight sky, its ancient stones radiating a sense of grim, unyielding strength. It was less a home and more a bastion, a testament to centuries of enduring his family's blighted curse and the endless machinations of their enemies. He felt the familiar weight of his responsibilities settle upon him as its gates loomed nearer, and he wondered, not for the first time, what fresh hell he was bringing through them now. He glanced at Emma. In the fading light, she looked even more ethereal, her silver hair catching the last rays, her face pale and drawn. There was a vulnerability about her that tugged at him, a stark contrast to the incredible power he'd witnessed her unleash. This is Blackwood Keep, he said, his voice carefully neutral. My home. Her only response was a slight, almost imperceptible shiver. Whether from cold or fear, he couldn't tell. Probably both. He led her through the massive gates, the eyes of his guards following their every move, their expressions a mixture of surprise and suspicion. He could already hear the whispers starting. A rogue in the king's company? Unheard of, especially one who looked like she'd wrestled a storm and lost. He assigned her chambers near his own, a decision he knew would raise eyebrows. But proximity was essential until he understood the nature of her magic and the extent of the Weaver's interest in her. He posted 2 of his most trusted guards outside her door. "Rest," he told her, his voice softer than he'd used all day. "We will speak in the morning." She just nodded, her gaze distant, her spirit seemingly retreating deep within herself. As he turned to leave, her voice, small but clear, stopped him. "Why?" Kaelen paused, his hand on the door. "Why what? Why did you save me?" Such a simple question. And yet, the answer was anything but. He could speak of duty, of the threat to his woods, of the need to understand her power. All true. But the deeper reason, the one that hummed in his blood and whispered her name on the wind, that he kept locked away. "No one dies in my forest unless I decree it," he said instead, his voice once more the cold, hard voice of the king. He didn't look back as he closed the door, but he could feel her gaze on him, a silent, questioning weight. He knew, with a certainty that settled like ice in his gut, that bringing Emma into Blackwood Keep was either the most foolish decision of his long, cursed life, or the only one that had ever truly mattered. And only time, that cruel, relentless arbiter, would tell which it was. Later that night, long after the keep had fallen into an uneasy slumber, Kaelen found himself pacing his private chambers. The earlier confrontation with the Shadow Weavers replaying in his mind, intertwined with the even more unsettling memory of the girl's incandescent power. He'd summoned his chief healer, an old Leakin named Maeve, to assess the girl, discreetly, of course. Maeve had returned with a troubled frown etched deep into her weathered face. "Her magic, my king," Maeve had reported, her voice hushed. "It's like nothing I've ever encountered. Raw, untamed, almost sentient. And her life force is intertwined with it in a way that is both incredibly potent and terrifyingly fragile. It's as if she's a vessel for the moon itself. A vessel for the moon." The words echoed Kaelen's own unnerving intuition. He walked to the arrow-slit window, staring out at the vast, dark expanse of the Ashenwood, its silver trees gleaming faintly under the distant starlight. The curse that clung to his soul, the one that had blighted his lineage for generations, felt heavier tonight, a cold dread seeping into his bones. It always did when something significant occurred. What did it mean, this girl, this Emma, appearing now, with her wild lunar magic and the Shadow Weavers snapping at her heels? Was she another trial? Another tool his enemies would try to use against him? Or was she something else entirely? A flicker of something akin to hope, so unfamiliar he almost didn't recognize it, tried to unfurl within his chest, only to be ruthlessly suppressed. Hope was a fool's game, one he'd learned long ago not to play. And yet, her eyes, so full of fear and fight, her scent, a siren song to his very wolf. He growled, low in his throat, a sound of frustration and a burgeoning, unwelcome possessiveness. He had a kingdom to protect, a curse to endure, enemies at his borders and within his walls. He had no time for enigmatic strays, no matter how compelling their magic or their scent. But as he stared out into the darkness, he knew, with a chilling certainty, that Emma was not a complication he could simply dismiss. She was a storm, and she had just broken directly over his carefully guarded, cursed life. He just hoped they both survived its passage. The question, he supposed, was whether he wanted to.
Sunlight, or what passed for it in this stone fortress, was a thief, wasn't it? It crept through the narrow, arrow-slit window, a pale, unwelcome intruder, and stole the blessed darkness that had been her only shield. Emma blinked. Her eyelids gritty. The rough-spun blanket beneath her fingers a strange comfort after years of sleeping on cold earth and damp leaves. For a disorienting moment, she didn't know where she was. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. And then, the memories flooded back, a tidal wave of terror and confusion. The Ashenwood. The silver fire erupting from her. The Shadow Hounds. And then... him. The Alpha King. His golden eyes, fierce and unreadable, seemed burned into her mind. She sat bolt upright, her gaze darting around the chamber. It was larger than any space she'd inhabited since before. The stone walls were bare but for a single, faded tapestry depicting a forest scene that felt both wild and strangely serene. There was a heavy wooden table, a pitcher of water that looked impossibly clean, and a door. A very solid, very locked-looking door. So... this was it then. Her gilded cage. What was he going to do with her? The question echoed the one she'd whispered to him in the forest, an answer still hanging heavy and unspoken in the air. A soft scratching sound came from the other side of the door, followed by a low murmur of voices. Guards. Of course. She wasn't a guest. She was a prisoner. A curiosity. A problem. Her magic, that treacherous, unpredictable thing, hummed faintly beneath her skin. A restless serpent. She tried to push it down, to smother it, the way she always did. But here, in this place that thrummed with an ancient, dormant power of its own, it felt bolder. Less inclined to obey. Before she could spiral further into her fear, the heavy door creaked open, not with a clang of iron, but with a surprisingly well-oiled smoothness. An older Leakin woman stood framed in the doorway. Her face a road map of wrinkles. Her eyes the color of winter skies, sharp and assessing. She wasn't as physically imposing as the king, Kaelen. His name came to Emma unbidden, a whisper in her thoughts, but there was an undeniable strength in her stance. A wiry resilience. The king sends me, the woman said, her voice raspy, like dry leaves skittering over stone. I am Alara. You will come with me. Another command. This kingdom, it seemed, was built on them. Emma's first instinct was to refuse, to shrink back. But there was something in Alara's gaze, not unkindness, exactly, but a profound weariness, as if she'd seen too much of the world's sorrows to be trifled with. And, truth be told, where else could she go? So, with a reluctant sigh that felt like admitting a small defeat, Emma rose. And if I don't want to, she heard herself say, a tiny spark of her old defiance flickering. Alara's lips thinned into what might have been a smile, or perhaps just a grimace. Then you will sit in this room and contemplate the tapestries, child. The king has patience. But I do not. Somehow, that was more unsettling than any overt threat. Alara led her not to a dungeon, as Emma had half expected, but to a small, circular chamber tucked away in a quieter part of the fortress. The room was filled with scrolls, ancient-looking books bound in cracked leather, and strange, intricate charts depicting the phases of the moon and constellations Emma didn't recognize. The air smelled of dried herbs, old parchment, and something else, something faintly metallic and ozonic, like the aftermath of her own uncontrolled magic. Sit, Alara commanded again, gesturing to a simple wooden stool. The king wishes to understand what you are. Emma flinched. I don't know what I am, she whispered, the admission raw and painful. I'm a mistake. Alara studied her for a long moment, her gaze so piercing it felt as if she could see the tangled mess of fear and wild magic coiled inside Emma. There are no mistakes in the weave of fate, child, Alara said finally, her voice a little softer now. Only patterns we do not yet comprehend. That power you wield, it is lunar magic. Raw, potent, and frighteningly untamed. Like a wild river. It can either carve a path of destruction, or bring life to a barren land. The choice, ultimately, will be yours. Over the next few days, Alara began to teach her, not with kindness, but with a gruff, demanding patience. She spoke of energies, of grounding, of the moon's pull not just on the tides but on the very spirit of their kind. Emma resisted. Her fear a bitter wall between them. Every time Alara urged her to reach for her magic, to feel it, the memory of that first, disastrous fire, of the screams, would rise like bile in her throat. I can't. She'd choke out. I'll hurt someone. You will hurt more by not learning, Alara would counter, her voice implacable. A weapon left untended is a danger to all, especially its wielder. Looking back, Emma knew Alara was right. But how could she explain the terror that felt like a physical hand squeezing her heart? During these strange, disorienting days, Kaelen, the king, was a looming, often unseen presence. Emma would feel his gaze sometimes, a prickling on her skin when she walked the corridors to Alara's chamber, or a sudden, intense awareness when she was in the training courtyard Alara occasionally took her to. He never approached her directly after that first night. Not at first. Instead, he observed. His golden eyes missing nothing. She saw him conferring with his advisors, Lord Valerius prominent among them, his face always a mask of disapproval whenever his gaze fell upon her. The whispers followed her everywhere, like rustling leaves, the rogue, the king's pet, the shadow touched. It made her skin crawl. She longed for the anonymity of the deep woods, even with its constant dangers. Because here, the dangers were different, weren't they? They were made of suspicion and sidelong glances, of a court that saw her as an ill omen. Once, during a particularly frustrating session with Alara where her magic had stubbornly refused to do anything but sputter erratically, she'd felt that familiar, intense focus and looked up, to see Kaelen standing in the shadows of an archway, his expression unreadable. Their eyes met. And for a breathless moment, the world seemed to stop. That strange pull, the one she'd felt in the Ashenwood, was still there. A confusing, unwanted hum beneath her skin. He was her captor. The Alpha King. A being of immense power and, she suspected, deep sorrows. Yet her soul, foolish thing, seemed to lean towards him as if he were the only source of warmth in a world gone cold. He broke the gaze first, turning away without a word, leaving her heart hammering and her cheeks flushed for reasons she refused to examine too closely. Then, one evening, a summons arrived. The king requested her presence for the evening meal. Not in the grand hall with his prying court, but in his private study. Emma's stomach twisted into a knot of anxiety. What did he want? Alara had simply nodded when told. Go, she'd said. It is time you face the wolf in his den, not just the king on his throne. His study was a surprise. It was still imposing, with its high, vaulted ceiling and shelves overflowing with books. But a large hearth crackled with a welcoming fire, casting dancing shadows on walls lined with maps and what looked like hunting trophies from creatures that defied imagination. Kaelen stood by the window, looking out, his broad shoulders outlined against the deep indigo of the twilight sky. He turned as she entered. And that intense golden gaze swept over her, making her feel both pinned and strangely seen. Emma, he said, his voice a low rumble that sent shivers down her spine. Thank you for joining me. He gestured to a small table set for two near the fire. The air was thick with unspoken things, with the memory of their first violent encounter, with the power that thrummed between them. Why did you ask me here? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper, because bluntness felt like her only shield. He offered a faint smile, a slight softening of his harsh features that did strange things to her pulse. "Perhaps I tire of eating alone," he said, the answer both simple and, she suspected, profoundly untrue. They ate in a silence that was initially fraught with tension but gradually eased as the warmth of the fire and the surprisingly simple food, roasted meat, fresh bread, a spiced wine, began to soothe her ragged nerves. He asked her about her life before, not prying, but with a quiet, unexpected gentleness. And she found herself talking. Hesitantly at first, then with a rush, the words tumbling out, speaking of the loneliness, the constant fear, the ache of being an outcast. She didn't tell him about the fire, not the specifics, but she spoke of her magic as a curse. "It is not a curse, Emma," he said softly, his golden eyes holding hers, "unless you allow it to be." In that moment, with the firelight casting a warm glow around them, he wasn't just the fearsome king. He was something else. Someone who understood burdens, perhaps. Just as a fragile sense of peace, something she hadn't felt in years, began to settle over her, a deafening crash from outside the study shattered the quiet. Followed by shouts. And the unmistakable clang of alarm bells. The fortress was under attack. Before either could react further, the study door burst open and a frantic guard stumbled in, his face pale. "My king! Shadow weavers! They're breaching the lower wards." Kaelen was on his feet in an instant. His earlier gentleness vanishing. Replaced by the hard, commanding aura of the Alpha King. His eyes, though, when they flicked to Emma, held a new, unreadable emotion. Concern. "Stay here," he commanded, his voice a low growl meant to ensure obedience. "You will be safe." And then he was gone, a blur of motion, his power a tangible force preceding him out the door. But Emma couldn't stay. How could she? The scent of dark magic, that same sickeningly sweet odor from the Ashenwood, was already seeping under the door, making her skin crawl. This was happening because of her, wasn't it? They were here for her. Without a second thought, ignoring the king's command, she followed him out into the chaos of the castle halls. Leakin warriors were rallying, their own battle snarls echoing. But the Shadow Weaver's magic was insidious. Tendrils of darkness creeping along the stone. Bolts of green and violet energy exploding against hastily erected shields. She saw Kaelen in the thick of it, a whirlwind of righteous fury, but even he couldn't be everywhere at once. A section of the main hall's ancient lunar ward, a shimmering barrier of protective energy, began to flicker and dim under a concentrated assault. If it fell, Emma knew, with a sickening certainty, that the consequences would be dire. Her own magic, that wild, unpredictable fire, surged within her. Not with fear this time, but with a desperate, urgent need to act. As if pulled by an unseen force, she found herself running towards the failing ward, towards Kaelen who was desperately trying to channel his own power into it. "Emma! What are you doing? Get back," he roared when he saw her, his face a mask of fury and, was that fear for her? But she didn't listen. She reached out, her small hands trembling, and pushed her own nascent, chaotic lunar energy into the ward. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. And then, her silver light met his golden power. And instead of clashing, they intertwined. A braid of moonlight and sunlight. Raw and potent. The ward flared. Not just repaired, but strengthened. Blazing with a combined energy that pulsed outwards. Driving the Shadow Weavers back with a howl of collective outrage. Emma and Kaelen stood side by side, their powers locked, their gazes meeting over the sudden, stunned silence. In his eyes, she saw shock, awe, and something else, something that made her heart skip a beat. From nearby, Ilara, who had appeared amidst the fighting, gasped. Her voice cutting through the sudden stillness. The prophecy. She whispered, her eyes wide with a terrible understanding. It spoke of this. When the Alpha's might weds the moon's pure light, the ancient shadow shall take flight, or, her voice dropping ominously, ignite the final, all-consuming night.
Ignite the final, all-consuming night. Alera's words, heavy as granite, crashed into Kaelen's mind, a chilling echo in the sudden, ringing silence of the hall. His gaze was fixed on Emma, on the girl who stood beside him, her small hands still sparking faintly with that impossible silver light, her chest heaving with ragged breaths. Their powers they had wed, as the old seer put it, a terrifying, exhilarating fusion of moonlight and his own sun-forged alpha strength. And for a moment, just a moment, they had driven back the darkness. But at what cost? He could feel the residue of her magic tingling on his skin, a strange warmth that was utterly alien yet undeniably resonant. It called to something deep within his wolf, something ancient and primal that had nothing to do with prophecies or kingship. And that, more than any dark prophecy, scared him down to the marrow of his bones. He saw the shock, the dawning awe, in her wide, silver-blue eyes as she looked at him, then at her own hands, as if she couldn't quite believe what they'd done. He wanted to reach for her, to shield her, to demand answers, all at once. But the king in him, the one forged in duty and hardened by his accursed lineage, clamped down hard on the burgeoning chaos of emotions. He had a fortress to secure, a court on the verge of panic, and the lingering stench of shadow weaver magic fouling his air. Alera. Kaelen's voice was a low command, cutting through the stunned silence that had fallen over the assembled lichens. Take her, keep her safe, and find out what that last part of your damned prophecy means. His eyes briefly met Emma's, a silent, unreadable message passing between them. Or perhaps it was just his own turmoil reflected in their depths. He saw a flicker of something there. Fear, yes, but also a nascent strength. A stubborn spark that refused to be extinguished. It was intriguing and incredibly dangerous. He couldn't allow himself to dwell on it. Not now. He turned to his captain of the guard, Theron, his voice all alpha steel. Double the patrols. I want every shadow in this keep checked and cleared, and bring Lord Valerius to my study. Now, Theron bowed, his expression grim. Aye, my king, but there's more. More? What more could there possibly be after an attack within his own walls? Speak, Captain. Word from the northern villages, sire, Theron said, his voice tight. A sickness, spreading fast. It started this evening, just as the weavers attacked here. They say the wells, the water runs black. Black water. A sickness that mirrored the shadow weaver's offensive. Kaelen felt a cold dread seep into him, colder than any winter night. This wasn't just a random assault. It was coordinated, an attempt to cripple his kingdom from within and without. And the timing, coinciding with Emma's display of power. Was she a magnet for this chaos? Or, as Alera's prophecy hinted, the only thing that could stand against it? Or, a horrifying thought slithered into his mind. Was her very presence, her untamed magic, somehow a catalyst? Lord Valerius arrived in his study not with the deference of a subject, but with the barely concealed anger of a man who believed his warnings had been ignored, his king foolish. The air crackled with tension. You see, my king, Valerius began, his voice a low, accusatory rumble, foregoing any pretense of courtly respect. I warned you about that girl. She is a beacon for this darkness. The moment she unleashes that unnatural power, the kingdom bleeds. Kaelen slammed his fist on the heavy oak desk, making the parchments jump. Enough, Valerius, he snarled, his own alpha power flaring, pushing back against the older Leakin's challenge. She just saved this keep, in case you failed to notice amidst your cowering. It was a low blow. Valerius was no coward, but the man's relentless suspicion grated on Kaelen's already frayed nerves. He felt the curse stir within him, that familiar cold whisper that loved to prey on discord, on fear. It nudged at him, suggesting Valerius was right, that Emma was a danger. He fought it back, but it left him feeling tainted. She is an anomaly, sire. A dangerous one, Valerius insisted, unbowed. Her magic is wild, an open wound that draws the very creatures we fight. What will you do when she cannot control it? When it consumes her, and us with her? What indeed? The question echoed Kaelen's own deepest fears. I will see her trained, Kaelen said, his voice hard, trying to project a confidence he didn't entirely feel. Alara believes it can be done. And if Alara is wrong? Valerius pressed, his eyes like chips of ice. If this moon-touched queen nonsense brings about the all-consuming night she spoke of, what then for our people, Kaelen? The use of his given name, without title, was a stark reminder of the precariousness of his position, of the fear that riddled his court. That, Kaelen said, his voice dropping to a dangerous softness, is my burden to bear, Lord Valerius. Not yours. Now, unless you have a solution for black water and dying villagers, I suggest you attend to your duties securing the western wall. Valerius's jaw tightened, but he gave a stiff, reluctant bow. As you command, sire. As the doors closed behind him, Kaelen sank into his chair, the weight of his crown, his curse, his kingdom pressing down on him. He needed answers, and he suspected only Emma and the wild, terrifying magic she carried held them. But how could he get them without damning them all? He found Emma with Alara in that strange, herb-scented room. The girl looking small and lost amidst the towering stacks of ancient lore. Her earlier fire seemed to have dimmed, replaced by a profound weariness that mirrored his own. She looked up as he entered, her silver-blue eyes wide and uncertain. That pull, that damnable, irresistible pull, tightened in his chest. The sickness in the north, he began, his voice devoid of preamble, because what was the point of pleasantries when his world was crumbling? It spreads with the setting sun. The local healers are useless against it. They say it's a blight on the very spirit of the water. Alara nodded slowly, her gaze distant. The shadow weavers corrupt the source, the lifeblood. It is an old tactic, but brutally effective. It creates panic, weakens the people's will, makes them vulnerable to darker influences. Emma was listening intently, her brow furrowed. Can it be cleansed? She asked, her voice barely a whisper, yet it seemed to cut through the despair that was threatening to engulf him. Kaelen looked at her then, truly looked at her. This girl, who had faced down Shadow Hounds, who had stood with him against a magical onslaught, who carried a power that could save or destroy. Can you cleanse it, Emma? He asked, the question hanging heavy between them. He saw the fear leap into her eyes, the familiar terror of her own abilities. I don't know, she stammered. My magic, it doesn't always do what I want. Sometimes it hurts things. Sometimes, Alara interjected, her voice firm. A fire must burn to purify. The choice is whether you guide the flame, or let it consume everything in its path. Kaelen knew, with a sinking feeling, what he had to do, what he had to ask of her. It was a desperate gamble, a king's last throw of the dice. The main source well for that region is at Whisper Fall, he said, his voice flat, devoid of the turmoil raging within him. I will go there. I will attempt to sever the Weaver's corruption with my own power. He saw Alara's eyes widen in alarm. My king, that is too dangerous. The curse on your line, it will fight you. It will drain you when you are most vulnerable. I have no other choice, Alara, Kaelen stated, his decision made. And then he looked at Emma, his golden gaze pinning her. And you, Emma, will come with me. Her breath hitched, her eyes darting from him to Alara and back again. The fear was stark on her face. But beneath it, he saw that flicker again, that stubborn spark. Before she could speak, before she could refuse, he felt a sharp, agonizing pain lance through his chest, the curse flaring with vicious intensity, as if sensing his desperate intent. He stumbled, a hand flying to his heart, a gasp tearing from his lips. The room tilted, the light dimming at the edges of his vision. He heard Emma cry out his name, a sound of pure, unadulterated panic, just before the darkness claimed him, pulling him down into its cold, silent embrace.
Kaelen! His name tore from her lips, a raw, ragged sound lost in the sudden, terrifying stillness of the room. Kaelen! One moment he was there. A pillar of impossible strength. His golden eyes filled with a desperate resolve that had made her own heart ache in response. The next, he was falling. A mighty oak crashing to the earth. His face a mask of agony as that unseen, insidious thing struck him from within. Emma lunged forward. Her own fear forgotten. A desperate need to catch him, to help him, consuming her. But Alara was faster, the old seer's surprising strength already there, easing the king's descent, her face a grim landscape of dread. The curse! Alara breathed, her voice like the rustle of dry bones. It strikes when he is vulnerable, when he dares to hope. Guards, alerted by the commotion or Kaelen's choked cry, burst into the chamber. Their expressions instantly hardening as they took in the scene, their fallen king. The strange rogue girl kneeling beside him, her hands outstretched, silver light flickering nervously around her fingertips. And just like that, before a single coherent thought could form in Emma's spinning head, the world tilted on its axis. It was all happening again, wasn't it? Chaos, fear, and her, always her, at the very center of the storm. What has she done to him? The voice belonged to Lord Valerius, appearing as if summoned by the very scent of disaster, his eyes, cold and accusing, pinning Emma where she knelt. His hand was already on the hilt of his sword. She's a witch! A viper we've harbored. She has struck down our king. No! Emma cried, scrambling back, the silver light around her flaring brighter in her distress. I didn't. I wouldn't. But her pleas were lost in the rising tide of panic and accusation. How could she explain what she didn't understand herself? That his pain had felt like her own? That the darkness that had felt him felt like an ancient enemy she was somehow meant to fight? It sounded like madness, even to her own ears. Alara, her face pale but her voice surprisingly firm, stepped between Emma and the advancing guards. Hold, Valerius. You know the king's affliction. This is the curse's work, not hers. Her presence agitates it. She is the catalyst. Valerius retorted, his gaze unwavering. Seize her. Rough hands grabbed Emma, hauling her to her feet despite Alara's protests. The touch was brutal, uncaring. She was dragged from the room. Kaelen still, pale-faced the last thing she saw, an image that burned itself into her very soul. They threw her into a cell, a cold, damp space deep within the fortress, the heavy door slamming shut with a sound of utter finality. Darkness enveloped her, thick and suffocating, a mirror to the despair quailing in her heart. Was he alive? Oh gods, please let him be alive. Looking back, she should have known, shouldn't she? That any fragile peace she might have found was just an illusion, a prelude to an even greater storm. It was all too perfect. She whispered into the oppressive gloom, remembering Valerius's timely arrival, the way the king had fallen just as he'd made his most vulnerable decision. This place, it's trying to tear us apart. Just before the guards had fully barred the door, Alara had pressed something small and cool into her palm, her fingers surprisingly strong. The archive spoke of the curse twisting perceptions, child, the old seer had whispered, her eyes filled with a grim urgency. Trust what this shows you. Seek the truth, even if it chills you to the bone. Emma uncurled her fingers. Lying in her palm was a small, intricately carved locket of tarnished silver, cool against her skin. A truth-seeker's locket, Alara had called it. But what truth could possibly save her now? Hours bled into an indistinguishable gray. Emma clutched the locket, its unfamiliar weight a small anchor in the sea of her fear and despair. Kaelen. Was he breathing? Was his heart still beating? The not knowing was a torment worse than any physical discomfort the cold stone cell could offer. Finally, summoning what little courage she had left, she focused on the locket, on Alara's words. Seek the truth. She closed her eyes, pouring her will, her desperation, her faint, flickering lunar magic into the ancient silver. The cold metal warmed beneath her touch. And then, the oppressive darkness of the cell receded, replaced by a cascade of swirling, ethereal images. Soundless yet deafening in their clarity. She saw ancient Leaken kings, proud and powerful, standing beside radiant queens whose hair shimmered with moonlight, their combined aura a beacon of strength and prosperity. Joy. Love. Power in balance. It was breathtaking. But then, the vision shifted. Darkening. Shadowy figures, their forms chillingly reminiscent of the weavers she'd encountered, performed a vile, terrifying ritual under a blood-red moon. Dark, corrosive energy, a visible manifestation of malice, struck out, ensnaring the golden aura of Kaelen's ancestral line. The curse! She was seeing its birth. And then its purpose, its cold, cruel directive, seared itself into her mind. It was designed to prevent, at all costs, the true bonding of the alpha king of this line with any queen who carried the moon's true fire. The locket showed her glimpses, heartbreaking vignettes, a queen with silver eyes struck down by a sudden, wasting illness just as her love for the king deepened. Another driven to madness by whispers only she could hear. A powerful king turning inexplicably cold, even cruel, to the mate whose touch had once been his greatest solace. The curse was a sentient thing. An insidious saboteur. Working through doubt, through fear, through ambition. Subtly twisting perceptions. Amplifying anxieties. Orchestrating accidents. It targeted not just the king, but the bond itself. Valerius, she saw him in the visions. His genuine fears for his kingdom, his inherent distrust of uncontrolled magic, all being subtly nudged, exploited by the curse's tendrils to paint her as the ultimate threat. Oh, gods! Emma breathed, a wave of nausea washing over her as the visions faded, leaving her trembling in the cold darkness of her cell once more. It isn't just Kaelen who is cursed. It's us. It's what we could be, together. The weight of that understanding was crushing. How could they fight an enemy that was woven into the very fabric of his being? An enemy that could turn his own heart, his own court, against the one thing that might save them all? A faint scraping sound at the cell door made her jump. her heart leaping into her throat. Had Valerius come to deliver his verdict already? But the face that peered through the small grill wasn't his. It was a younger woman, a leaking with kind, hesitant eyes whom Emma vaguely recognized from the castle staff. Lyra, that was her name. She'd sometimes offered Emma a shy smile, a small, silent kindness in the otherwise hostile environment of the court. "Lady Emma?" Lyra whispered, her voice barely audible. Are you all right?" Emma scrambled to the door. "Is it the king? Is Kaelen?" She couldn't bring herself to finish the question. Lyra's expression softened with pity. "He lives, my lady. But he is gravely weakened. The healers say the curse holds him in a dark dream. Lord Valerius has convinced much of the council that your magic, your presence, is to blame. He calls for your judgment at dawn." Dawn. So little time. Desperation clawed at Emma. She had to make someone understand. Taking a wild gamble, she clutched the locket. "Lyra," she began, her voice trembling but urgent, "what I'm about to tell you will sound like madness. But it's the truth. The king's curse, it's more than an illness. It's a weapon. And it's trying to destroy him by destroying anyone who could truly help him, anyone who could." She hesitated, the words catching in her throat, "anyone he could bond with who carries lunar magic." She quickly, haltingly, described the core of the locket's vision, the curse's true intent. Lyra listened, her eyes widening, a mixture of fear and dawning comprehension on her face. "My grandmother," Lyra breathed when Emma had finished, "she used to speak of the king's shadow sickness, how it twisted thoughts and preyed on love. Everyone dismissed it as old tales." "It's not a tale, Lyra," Emma pleaded. "It's real. And it's using Valerius. You have to believe me." For a long moment, Lyra just stared at her. And Emma's fragile hope began to wither. What had she expected? But then, Lyra gave a small, decisive nod. "I believe you," she whispered. What would you have me do?" Relief, so potent it almost buckled Emma's knees, flooded through her. "His beta, Theron," Emma said quickly. "Valerius has sidelined him, I know. But he's loyal to Kaelen. Can you get a message to him? Tell him the curse wears many faces, even familiar ones. Tell him the king fights not just for his life, but for his mind." Lyra's eyes were wide. But she nodded again. "I will try," she promised. "May the moon guide your steps, Lyra," Emma whispered as the girl slipped away, a tiny beacon of hope in an overwhelming darkness. The hours that followed were the longest of Emma's life. Every creak of the stones, every distant shout, sent her heart lurching. Was Kaelen fighting? Was he winning? Or was the curse, that insidious shadow, tightening its grip, poisoning his thoughts against her forever? She pressed her forehead against the cold, damp wall of her cell, sending a silent, desperate plea into the darkness, a plea for the stubborn, arrogant, golden-eyed king who had, against all odds, somehow found a crack in the armor around her own heart. "Fight, Kaelen," she whispered to the unhearing stones. "Please, fight." Just as the first, faint hint of gray began to lighten the impossibly high window of her cell, signaling the approach of a dawn she dreaded, she heard footsteps. Heavy, purposeful footsteps. Accompanied by the grim rattle of armor. Valerius. He had come for her. The door groaned open. And there he stood, his face set in lines of harsh, unwavering conviction. Behind him, Emma could see several heavily armed guards. Her heart sank. Lyra hadn't made it. Or Theron hadn't believed. It was over. "The council has deliberated, rogue," Valerius announced, his voice devoid of any emotion. For the crime of high treason and the attempted assassination of King Kaelen by means of dark witchcraft, you are hereby sentenced to. But whatever her sentence was, it was cut short. A different voice, weaker, raspy, yet filled with an undeniable, crackling authority that even Valerius could not ignore, echoed from down the corridor. Valerius, release her. Now. Kaelen.
His own voice sounded like stones grinding together in a dry riverbed, raspy and weak, yet it cut through the charged silence of the dungeon corridor with the undeniable force of an Alpha King's command. Valerius, release her. Now. Kaelen leaned heavily against the cold, damp wall, each breath an effort. The aftermath of the curse's violent resurgence a leaden weight in his limbs. But he would not show it. Not to this man. He saw Valerius stiffen, the older Leakin's eyes, hard and unyielding moments before, now flickering with a startled uncertainty as he turned. And then Kaelen saw her, Emma, framed in the open doorway of that wretched cell, looking impossibly small, her silver hair disheveled, her face pale and smudged with dirt, but her eyes blazed with a defiant, silver fire that even the grim surroundings couldn't dim. A fierce, protective surge, so potent it almost buckled his knees, washed through Kaelen, momentarily eclipsing his own pain. What had they done to her? How had he allowed this? My king, Valerius stammered, recovering quickly, his tone regaining its usual rigid disapproval. You are unwell. This creature, Kaelen interrupted, pushing himself upright, ignoring the screaming protest of his muscles, is under my protection. And you, Lord Valerius, were about to grievously overstep your authority. He let his gaze sweep over the armed guards. His alpha presence, though weakened, still enough to make them shuffle uneasily. The council's verdict is nullified. By my decree. He could feel the effort of will it took to stand there, to project strength he barely possessed. But he would not falter. Not now. He had spent the agonizing hours of his forced lucidity piecing together the fractured whispers Theron and Lyra had managed to relay, confirming the insidious suspicions that had begun to take root even before the curse had struck him down. The visions Alara had described to them, the locket. Emma was not the cause of the darkness. She was its target, and so, it seemed, was he. Whenever he dared to get too close to the one woman who might hold the key to his kingdom's survival, perhaps even to his own. Valerius looked as if he might argue, his jaw tight with suppressed fury. But the sight of Theron and a handful of Kaelen's most loyal warriors emerging from the shadows behind the king seemed to give him pause. Smart man. As you command, sire. Valerius finally bit out, his voice like chipped flint. He gestured curtly, and the guards reluctantly stepped away from Emma. Kaelen's gaze locked with hers then, and the world seemed to narrow to just the two of them. He saw the exhaustion in her eyes, the lingering fear, but beneath it, a flicker of something else. Relief? Gratitude? Or was it just the reflection of his own desperate hope? Emma, he said, his voice softer now, the rasp still there but the hard edge gone. Are you harmed? She shook her head, a small, almost imperceptible movement, her eyes still wide, still searching his. He longed to go to her, to offer comfort, to apologize for what his court, his own momentary weakness, had put her through. But there were too many eyes, too many listening ears, and the threat was far from over. "We have much to discuss," he stated, then turned to Theron. "The reports from the north, have they worsened?" Theron's face was grim. "Aye, my king. The sickness spreads like wildfire through tinder. Entire villages are falling silent, and our scouts report a massive gathering of Shadow Weaver forces near Whisperfall, at the very source of the Eldoria River. It seems they intend to corrupt it completely, to poison the lifeblood of half the kingdom." Kaelen felt a cold fury settle in his gut. This was it then, their grand play. They thought him weakened, his kingdom in disarray. They were not entirely wrong, but they had made one critical miscalculation. They had underestimated Emma, and, perhaps, they had underestimated him. Now that his eyes were finally, painfully, open to the true nature of the enemy he faced, an enemy that worked not just from without, but from within his very blood. He made his decision in that instant, the clarity of it cutting through the fog of his pain and exhaustion. "We ride for Whisperfall," he announced, his voice ringing with renewed authority, silencing the murmurs that had begun to ripple through the assembled guards. At once, Alara, who had pushed her way through to his side, her ancient eyes filled with worry, protested immediately. "Kaelen, you are in no condition. The curse will not rule me." "Alara," he cut her off, his gaze unwavering. "And my people are dying. We cannot wait." He looked at Emma then, truly looked at her, seeing not just the rogue girl or the powerful anomaly, but the woman who had stood with him, whose light had. Even in his weakness, Kaelen felt a surge of something fierce and protective as his gaze met Emma's across the cold stone of the dungeon corridor. The relief that washed over her face when she saw him, truly saw him standing, was a balm to his own ragged spirit, even as the shadows of her recent confinement clung to her like a shroud. "My king," Valerius began, his voice tight with disapproval, "this is unwise. The girl is a magnet for trouble. She is the reason I yet stand." "Valerius," Kaelen cut him off, his voice, though strained, carrying the unmistakable ring of command. He ignored the Lord's sputtering indignation, his focus solely on Emma. He saw the questions in her silver blue eyes, the fear still lingering there, but also a new, fragile trust that made something in his chest ache. "Theron," Kaelen called to his captain, "prepare a small, swift party. We ride for Whisperfall." Now, Alara stepped forward, her face etched with worry. "Kaelen, your strength. The curse is still active within you. And what of her?" She gestured towards Emma. "Is she ready for such a confrontation?" Before Kaelen could answer, Emma herself spoke, her voice surprisingly firm despite the ordeal she'd endured. "I will go, Alara. If there is a chance I can help, if my magic can fight this blight." She looked at Kaelen then, a silent question in her eyes, a plea for him to believe in her, perhaps even more than she believed in herself. And in that moment, Kaelen knew he did. "Your magic, Emma," he said, meeting her gaze, "is a part of you, and you are stronger than you know." The journey to Whisperfall was a blur of forced marches and grim determination. Kaelen pushed himself, ignoring the insidious whispers of the curse that tried to drag him down, to fill him with doubt about the girl who rode silently beside him. He saw the toll the journey, and her own recent trauma was taking on Emma. But her spirit remained unbroken, her silver eyes scanning the blighted landscape with a fierce concentration. They arrived to find the once vibrant forest around the falls shrouded in a sickly miasma, the air thick with the stench of decay and dark magic. Shadow weavers, more than he had ever seen in one place, chanted around the main cascade, their vile energies visibly poisoning the cascading water, turning it black and viscous. This was it, the heart of the corruption, and as they prepared for the inevitable clash, Kaelen felt a tremor of fear, not for himself, but for Emma. What if the prophecy was right? What if their combined effort did ignite that final, all-consuming night? The battle, when it came, was desperate. Kaelen, still not at his full strength, fought with the fury of a cornered wolf, his golden power a beacon against the encroaching darkness. But the weavers were too many, their magic too insidious. He saw Emma, Alara at her side, trying to channel her lunar energy to push back against the blight. But it was like trying to hold back the tide with bare hands. He took a glancing blow from a dark spell, pain searing through his side, and he stumbled, his vision blurring. And then he saw it, the lead sorcerer, his face a mask of malevolent glee, preparing a devastating ritual, one clearly aimed at corrupting the falls beyond any hope of reclamation. They were losing. It was in that moment of despair, seeing Kaelen falter, seeing the hopelessness in the eyes of the few warriors they had brought, that something within Emma seemed to break, or perhaps to finally awaken. Kaelen watched, his breath catching in his throat, as she stepped forward, her small form suddenly radiating an intensity that dwarfed everyone in the clearing. Her eyes began to glow, not with the soft silver light he'd seen before, but with an almost unbearable, incandescent white fire. The air crackled around her, the very stones beneath her feet humming with a power that felt ancient, terrifying, and utterly magnificent. No more, her voice echoed, no longer a whisper, but a clear, resonant command that seemed to carry the weight of the moon itself. And then she raised her hands, and the world around them exploded in a silent, blinding wave of pure, untamed lunar annihilation. It wasn't a shield this time. It was a weapon. He saw the shadow weavers scream, their forms dissolving, their dark magic unraveling like rotten threads before this onslaught of incandescent rage and sorrow. He saw the blighted water of Whisperfall recoil, then begin to shimmer with a faint, returning clarity where her light touched it. But he also saw the terrible, consuming power it was taking from her, the way her form trembled under the strain, the silver in her hair seeming to blaze brighter as if it were burning her from within. This wasn't just control. This was something else, something absolute. And as the last echo of her power faded, leaving a stunned, almost sacred silence in its wake, Emma swayed. Her eyes, still glowing but now filled with an immense, heartbreaking sadness, fixed on him. Then she crumpled to the ground, a fallen star, leaving Kaelen to stare, his heart caught between terrible awe and a dawning, agonizing fear for what she had just become.
Silence. A silence so profound it hummed, a stark contrast to the roaring inferno of silver light that had consumed her moments, or was it lifetimes, ago. Emma drifted, a disembodied thought in a sea of white-hot exhaustion. Then, pain. A dull, throbbing ache that started in her bones and spread outwards, a reminder that she still inhabited a body. A body that felt like it had been shattered and pieced back together by clumsy hands. A touch, feather-light against her forehead. Then strong, warm fingers lacing through hers. Emma? Kaelen. His voice, a low rumble, rough with an emotion she couldn't quite decipher, was the anchor that pulled her back from the brink. Her eyelids fluttered open, heavy as stone, to find his golden eyes. So fierce. So kingly. Now filled with a raw, naked concern that stole her breath. He was there. Kneeling beside her on the damp, strangely cleansed earth of Whisperfall. His presence a bulwark against the terrifying emptiness her own power had left in its wake. "You're all right," he murmured, more a prayer than a statement. "Gods, Emma, I thought." He didn't finish. Couldn't seem to find the words. She tried to speak, to ask what had happened, but only a dry croak emerged. He understood, offering her a water skin, his hand steady as he helped her drink. The water, no longer black and viscous, but clear and sweet, tasted like life itself. "You did it," he said softly, his gaze sweeping over the now peaceful falls, where the faintest silver shimmer still clung to the air. You cleansed it. The weavers are gone." She remembered the overwhelming surge, the feeling of her very essence igniting. Had that truly been her? "The light," she whispered, her voice raspy. "It was so much." Alara appeared then, her ancient face a mixture of awe and profound gravity. "The phoenix bloom, child," the seer said, her voice hushed. "A power of absolute ending and ultimate beginning, awakened by love facing its direst test. You burned away the shadow, Emma, but such fire demands a heavy price from its wielder." Emma looked at Kaelen, at the intensity in his gaze, and a warmth, fragile yet fierce, began to unfurl in her chest, pushing back the exhaustion, the fear. Love? Was that what this overwhelming, terrifying connection between them was? The journey back to Blackwood Keep felt different. The few warriors who had accompanied them treated Emma with a new, almost fearful reverence. She was no longer just the strange rogue girl, she was the source of the consuming light that had saved them. It was a heavy weight, that awe. Kaelen, however, was simply Kaelen. He stayed close, his quiet strength a shield against the curious, worried glances. He didn't press her about the power, didn't ask questions she had no answers for. Instead, he spoke of small things, the way the forests seemed to breathe easier, the returning song of birds, the resilience of their people. And in those small conversations, Emma felt a bond forming, deeper and more profound than the faded pull she'd always sensed. This was a connection forged in shared battle, in acknowledged vulnerability. Once within the familiar stone walls of the keep, Alara led them to her chamber, the air thick with the scent of old knowledge. "The phoenix bloom changes everything," Alara stated, her eyes bright with a mixture of excitement and trepidation as she spread out a series of ancient scrolls. "It confirms your heritage, Emma. You are a true moon-touched queen. And it means the curse on Kaelen's bloodline will now redouble its efforts. It knows its destroyer has awakened." Emma looked at Kaelen, saw the grim resolve settle on his face. He took her hand, his grip firm. "The locket showed me the curse's purpose, Kaelen," she said, her voice steadier now. "It's designed to keep us apart, to twist trust, to turn love into suspicion. It feeds on discord." "Then we give it nothing to feed on," he responded, his golden eyes blazing with a fierce determination that mirrored her own. "But how do we fight it directly, Alara?" he asked, turning to the seer. "It's woven into my very being." Alara pointed to a faded illustration on one of the scrolls. It depicted two figures, one solar, one lunar, their hands clasped, surrounded by a complex web of symbols. "There is a ritual," she said slowly, "an ancient rite of unbinding and reclaiming. It requires the Alpha King to willingly open himself to the curse's darkest heart, and for the moon-touched queen to walk with him into that abyss, her light the only shield, the only weapon. It is a path from which one, or both, may not return." A chilling silence fell upon the room. Emma's heart hammered against her ribs. To willingly walk into the heart of that ancient, malevolent power? To face the very essence of the curse that had haunted Kaelen's line for centuries? It was a terrifying prospect. She looked at Kaelen, saw the conflict warring in his eyes, the king's desperate need to save his people, the man's fear of what this ritual might demand of her. "If this is the only way," Kaelen said finally, his voice rough with unshed emotion, "then it is a path I must walk." His gaze found Emma's, intense, questioning. He wasn't asking her to save him, she realized. He was asking if she was willing to face this with him. As an equal. As his partner. "The ritual," Alara continued, her voice grave, "will demand that you, Emma, channel your purest lunar essence directly into Kaelen, into the very core of the curse. You must become the conduit to either cleanse it, or be consumed by it alongside him. It will require absolute trust. An unbreakable bond." Emma thought of the desolation she had felt as a rogue, the constant fear, the gnawing loneliness. And then she thought of Kaelen. Of his fierce protection. His unexpected gentleness. The way her soul seemed to settle in his presence despite the storms that raged around them. This wasn't just about saving a kingdom anymore, was it? It was about saving him. It was about claiming a future that the curse, that fate, had tried so desperately to deny them. "When do we begin?" Emma asked, her voice quiet but firm, her decision made. She saw a flicker of raw relief, of profound gratitude, in Kaelen's golden eyes before he masked it with his kingly composure. Alara looked from one to the other, a slow, sad smile touching her lips. "Tonight," she said. "The moon will be at its apex, a moon of turning tides. It will either be your greatest ally, or witness your undoing." As the preparations for the dangerous ritual began, a heavy sense of foreboding settled over the keep. Emma found herself in Kaelen's private chambers. Alara having instructed them to spend the remaining hours in quiet contemplation, to strengthen their connection. The silence between them wasn't awkward, it was filled with unspoken words, with the weight of the choice they had made. Kaelen finally broke it, his voice uncharacteristically hesitant. "Emma, you don't have to do this. There might be another way, given time." She turned to face him, taking his strong hands in hers. His skin was warm, his grip powerful even in its gentleness. "Looking back, Kaelen," she said softly, meeting his gaze without flinching, "every path I've ever walked, every hardship, every moment of fear, it all seems to have led me here. To you. To this. There is no other way I would choose." His golden eyes searched hers, finding only unwavering resolve. He pulled her closer, his forehead resting against hers, their breath mingling. "I never believed in destiny," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "Not until I found you in the Ashenwood. And I never believed I could be anything more than a hunted rogue," she confessed, her voice trembling slightly. "Until you showed me I could be a queen." He tilted her chin up, his gaze intense, burning with a love that was both fierce and tender. "You already are, Emma," he murmured. "My queen." And then, he kissed her. A kiss that was not about desperation or fear, but about a profound, soul-deep acknowledgement. A promise of forever, even if forever only lasted until the moon reached its zenith. It was a seal on their pact. A moment of perfect, heartbreaking connection before they stepped into the heart of the storm, together.
Her kiss still burned on his lips, a promise of forever whispered against the looming threat of annihilation. As Alara's final incantation faded into the heavy silence of the ancient chamber, Kaelen squeezed Emma's hands, her small fingers interlaced with his. A fragile anchor in the storm he was about to willingly embrace. And then she began. He felt at the moment her lunar essence, that pure, silver fire he'd come to associate with hope and a terrifying, exhilarating power, touched the core of his being. It wasn't a gentle caress. It was a searing, sanctifying flame, seeking out the deeply embedded tendrils of the curse that had clung to his soul, his bloodline, for centuries. Pain, white-hot and absolute, ripped through him, 1,000 poison blades twisting in his gut. He roared, the sound less human than beast, his body arching against the ancient stone altar where Alara had bid them stand. Through the red haze of agony, he could feel Emma trembling, her own power a torrent, yet her grip on his hands never wavered. He heard her voice, a desperate, loving encouragement, a lifeline in the darkness. Stay with me, Kaelen. Fight it. We fight it together. The curse, that sentient, malevolent shadow, writhed within him, fighting back with all the fury of a cornered predator, throwing up images of despair, of failure, of Emma consumed by her own light. But her light, her unwavering presence, was stronger. He clung to it, to her, drawing on a strength he hadn't known he possessed, a strength born not of his alpha power, but of their bond. And then, with a final, earth-shattering wrench that felt as if his very soul was being torn in two and then remade, something snapped. The suffocating weight he'd carried his entire life, the cold dread that had been his constant companion, simply vanished. A profound, almost shocking lightness flooded through him, followed by an exhaustion so complete he felt himself falling. Emma's name a broken prayer on his lips. He awoke slowly, awareness returning like dawn after a long, brutal night. The first thing he registered was the scent of Emma, moonlight, wildflowers, and her own unique, irreplaceable essence. He was lying on furs, the scent of Alara's herbs a faint, calming presence in the air. And Emma, she was there, her head resting on his chest, her breathing soft and even against his own, her hand still clasped tightly in his. She was pale, so incredibly pale, with faint silver tracings like delicate veins visible beneath the skin of her temples, a testament to the immense power she had wielded, the price she had paid. But she was alive, and she was warm. Gratitude, so fierce and overwhelming it brought an unaccustomed burn to his eyes, washed through him. He was free. After all these centuries, after generations of his line had suffered, he was finally, truly free. And it was all because of her. This small, stubborn, impossibly brave woman who had walked into the heart of his darkness and brought her own indomitable light. Emma, he whispered, his voice rough, stroking her silver hair. Her eyes fluttered open, those incredible silver-blue pools focusing on him with a sleepy, questioning gaze. Kaelen, she murmured, is it over? He nodded, unable to speak past the lump in his throat, and simply pulled her closer, burying his face in her hair, inhaling her scent as if it were the very air he needed to breathe. Over. Yes. For them, for their kingdom, it was finally over. And something entirely new was just beginning. He felt her sigh, a soft exhalation of relief, as she snuggled deeper against him, her body fitting against his as if she'd been made for that very purpose. And maybe she had. Maybe, after all the pain and the prophecies and the fear, it really was that simple. Weeks later, with the kingdom slowly healing under the combined warmth of Kaelen's revitalized leadership and Emma's gentle, intuitive wisdom, he found her in the newly consecrated Lunar temple, the one she had so bravely claimed during the castle's siege. Sunlight, clear and untainted by any lingering shadow, streamed through the oculus, bathing her in a soft glow as she spoke quietly with a group of young Leakin initiates, their faces rapt with attention. She wore a simple gown of deep blue that shimmered like twilight, her silver hair braided with small, star-like moonflowers. She was every inch his queen. He watched her for a long moment, his heart swelling with a love so profound it almost ached. She looked up then, as if sensing his presence, and a radiant smile lit her face. A smile that still, after everything, made his world tilt on its axis. "My king," she said, her voice carrying a warmth that embraced him even from across the chamber. "My queen," he responded, walking towards her, his own smile mirroring hers. The young initiates bowed respectfully, their eyes shining with an adoration that was now commonplace whenever Emma was near. "Alara tells me you've been helping them find their own balance with the moon's energies," he remarked, taking her hand, lacing their fingers together. Emma nodded. "It seems my journey has given me some insight to share. Not everyone's magic has to feel like a wildfire, does it?" she said, a teasing glint in her eyes that he loved. "No," he agreed, his voice soft. "Sometimes it can feel like coming home." He led her from the temple, out into the vibrant courtyard where children now played without fear, where the scent of flowers, not blight, filled the air. The changes in his kingdom were palpable, a testament to the curse being broken, a testament to her. "There is one more tradition, you know," he said, stopping beneath the ancient heart tree of the keep. "For the recognized queen." From his tunic, he pulled a delicate circlet of intertwined silver and gold, an ancient royal amulet passed down through generations. One his mother had worn, and her mother before her. It was said to only truly shine when worn by a queen whose heart was true to the Alpha and the land. With gentle reverence, he placed it upon Emma's brow. It settled amidst her silver hair as if it had always belonged there, its ancient metals gleaming with a soft, warm light that seemed to pulse in time with her heartbeat. "It seems my heart knew you long before my head did, Emma," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "And now my kingdom knows its queen." That night, under the light of a full, glorious moon, a moon that felt like a blessing now, not a harbinger, Kaelen led Emma deep into the Ashenwood. The forest, once a place of shadows and fear for her, was now vibrant with life, its silver-barked trees shimmering with a gentle, welcoming luminescence. He took her to the clearing where they had first truly met, where he had fought the Shadow Hounds, where her power had first blazed in his presence. But tonight, there was only peace. Only the soft murmur of the wind through the ancient trees and the distant song of a nightingale. They stood there for a long moment, simply breathing each other in, their bond a living, palpable thing between them, a tapestry woven of shared pain, sacrifice, and a love that had defied curses and conquered despair. Looking back, Kaelen, Emma whispered, her head resting against his chest, her hand over his heart. I never thought I'd find a place where I truly belonged, where my magic wasn't something to be feared. He held her tighter, his chin resting atop her silver hair. Your magic is you, Emma. Beautiful, powerful, a light in all my darkness. And you belong right here, with me, always. He tilted her face up to his golden eyes blazing with all the love in his soul. And so the Alpha King and his moon-touched queen began their reign. He murmured, echoing the words he knew the storytellers would one day use. Their love a legend whispered on the wind, a promise kept under the eternal watch of the moon. And as he kissed her, a deep, lingering kiss that spoke of forever, he knew with every fiber of his being that their happily ever after, so hard-won, so deeply cherished, was only just beginning. The forest around them seemed to sigh in contentment, the moonlight bathing them in its benevolent glow, a silent benediction on their united hearts.